Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me in this Polycentricity webinar series and for sharing the opportunity with Tom Kunz. In the next 15 minutes, I'm going to cover a couple of examples to illustrate how the performance framework can be used to assess conflict and conflict solving and competition in polycentric governance systems. So the first case is the case of the water governance in Spain, and specifically in the Ebro River. Water governance in Spain has been traditionally centralized in river basin organizations, but over time has become increasingly polycentric, with new decision centers emerging, embodied mostly in the role of regional and municipal governments and their authority over environmental policy. Water is managed in Spain through a system of collective use rights, and water planning and operations and management decisions happen mostly within river basin organizations. And these are participated by the main water users, meaning irrigators, urban users, and to a second degree also the industry. Pressure over resources in the last decades has motivated a water markets reform that tries to introduce competition over the allocation of water use rights and some flexibility in the existing system. However, there have been very few water leases since then, and this owes to three main reasons. The system is quite rigid. There are a number of operations that users have to make to put leases into operation. So, for example, the leases have to be approved by the river basin organizations, the regional governments, and municipal governments, depending on the cases. Second, there is not a real water price system, so there is no information around which buyers and sellers can find each other. And finally, there has been quite some resistance by farmers, the main holders of water use rights, to lease water. And this is because they've understood that that could be used by the government to promote the rationalization of their water use rights, which has been in the agenda for quite some time already. Although formal water markets have not really taken off, there has been a myriad of informal water markets and also water transfers that were not necessarily monetarized, mostly to cope with droughts. A paradigmatic example of that is the case of the Riegos del Alto Aragón irrigation project, which is located in the Ebro River basin. The way farmers within this large project have actually introduced competition is via something called the pooled transferable quota system that I will explain in a second. So the Riegos del Tarragón irrigation project is located in the northeast of Spain. It encompasses 10,000 farmers grouped into around 50 water user associations. During normal water availability periods, the water user associations request water to a second order organization that coordinates them all. During droughts, however, the water use right that all the water use associations share is apportioned to each association. So each association gets a share. And additionally, associations can transfer parts of those shares with each other. This happens thanks to a series of well-understood rules For example, only farmers within a irrigation association or district can request water leases if they have land in both irrigation districts. They have to be notified at the beginning of the irrigation campaign and can only hold for that campaign. At the same time, this pool transferable quota system is working well because it builds on a rather robust series of rules that make for the cooperative water allocation within each water use association and in the ensemble of them all. And some of these rules ensure that the infrastructure is well maintained, which is critical for water leases to happen, but also that there is a well understood monitoring system to control that water is allocated as expected. Some water associations have invested in irrigation efficiency to better cope with droughts, among other reasons. And this in turn has made them more attractive of transfer from other less efficient water use associations, which to some extent proves the allocative efficiency promoted by the transfers. So overall, the system fares relatively well in terms of efficacy, efficiency, and coherence. This can be associated to a clear division of authority, which resides mostly in the river basin organizations, which are nevertheless participated by the main user groups, meaning farmers and urban users. So water transfers, both formal and informal, have been quite successful in helping farmers and urban users to cope with droughts in very localized contexts. That said, water markets, as I said, have been relatively marginal in the entire system. So the contribution of competition to water governance has been also marginal. And water prices paid for water leases have been relatively high, as per some anecdotal information that is available, which shows that the markets and the transfers have contributed to allocative efficiency because water has gone expectedly wherever water productivity was higher. And the coherence of the entire system is still strong, meaning that the collective water use right system has not been heavily disrupted by water transfers. And the question is whether it would be if the transfers would be more massively used by water users. In terms of accountability and representation, the system fares okay. So farmers and urban users are well represented in the river basin organization, but environmental interests are less so. Indeed, some studies show that water markets have occurred at the expense of violating minimum environmental flows, and meaning creating environmental externalities in ecosystems. And also, as I said, there is not a really public information system that records volumes traded and prices paid, and this undermines accountability. In terms of social learning, adaptability, and network building, the system fares relatively low. This is mostly due or can be associated to several reasons. One is that although there have been a diversity of informal water transfer experiences, there is not a mechanism that allows these initiatives to learn from each other, which has prevented the system to evolve. And another barrier in the evolution and learning of the system has been the resistance of farmers to have the water use rights system rationalized, which would probably contribute to markets to really take off. The second example that I wanted to bring in this presentation is the case of shale gas governance in Colorado. This is a case of a polycentric system that is trying to, among other things, cope with the conflict that emerged with the fracking boom from 2008 on. The governance of shale gas and oil and gas more generally in the States is rather polycentric. So the states have most of the regulatory powers. In Colorado, these powers are embodied in the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission and the Colorado Department of Health and Environment. Federal government has authority, but only limited to federal lands. And local authorities have some authority, but also varies across the states. In Colorado, this is limited mostly to deciding on the seating of explorations. So as I said, a number of conflicts emerged from 2008 on, and this mostly had to do with a ban imposed by local municipalities on gas explorations. This, of course, created a conflict with the industry, but also with the state. The state considered that local authorities did not have the powers to do that. So to address this conflict, there has been a number of mechanisms put in place. The governor created an ad hoc task force to solve the conflict with the municipalities, but the conflict has also been addressed at the court. Indeed, the court decided to reverse the decision from local municipalities and align with the state in a sense. In response to this, local municipalities started to bargain with the industry to at least control its operations via memorandums of understanding. Interest groups against explorations also tried to put together a series of ballot initiatives in an attempt to expand the conflict beyond the court ruling. The state also has tried to ameliorate conflict via new regulations, like the regulations on methane emissions issued by Department of Health and Environment. These new regulations were very effective in appeasing conflict, and this owes to some extent to the ability of the department to gather and integrate information from local municipalities. So the provision of information by local authorities was key, but this depended a lot also on whether said municipalities had the resources to generate that information. So overall, the system fares not that well in terms of efficacy, efficiency, and coherence, and this can be associated to an underlying misunderstanding or confusion in terms of who has the authority to regulate new explorations, whether the state and or local municipalities. So conflicts still remain. They have been addressed through a variety of mechanisms with mixed results, which do not really contribute to a common understanding of how shale gas is governed in the state. In terms of accountability and representation, the system fares just okay. So there is information, but not sufficient information because local municipalities do not necessarily have the resources to generate that information. The state, through the Oil and Gas Commission, but also the Department of Health and Environment, has been trying to integrate the local municipalities' interests, but has also left behind in that process environmental interest groups. In terms of social learning, adaptability, and network building, interestingly enough, the system fares quite high, and this can be understood as a byproduct of the persistence of conflict, in response of which the different actors, mostly local municipalities and interest groups against explorations, but also the state, have been trying to accommodate and to come up with new ways to either appease the conflict or expand it, as we saw with the ballot initiatives. Okay, so these are the two examples. If you have any questions, well, I hope I'm able to address them via email on another occasion. Thank you.